Good morning. We're going to move into Isaiah chapter 30. And you can probably guess what the first part's about. It's about judgment. But the second part is one of my favourite chapters. Now, we're going to be doing this chapter in at least two parts. But let me just say something again about judgment, because it appears again and again and again, and people don't like it. But have you noticed, every time there's judgment, there's also salvation comes in at the end. If we want to understand God's salvation properly, we need to understand his judgment properly. Or look at it like this. Suppose you picked up a textbook, and in each chapter you just blacked out or refused to read half of each chapter. What do you think you would learn? What do you think your level of understanding would be at the end of it? Pretty close to zero, or an utterly skewed and wrong understanding. So if God is speaking about judgment in virtually every book in the Bible, virtually every page of the Bible, we need to pay attention to it. So let's have a deeper understanding of God and his salvation. And so let's now start. With that in mind, let's go on to chapter 30. Woe to the obstinate children, declares the Lord. That's his people. To those who carry out plans that are not mine, forming an alliance but not by my spirit, heaping sin upon sin, who go down to Egypt without consulting me, who look for help to Pharaoh's protection, to Egypt's shade for refuge. But Pharaoh's protection will be to your shame. Egypt's shade will bring you disgrace. Though they have officials in Zoan and their envoys have arrived in harness, everyone will be put to shame because of a people useless to them, who bring neither help nor advantage, but only shame and disgrace. God's people should have looked to him for salvation. But instead they looked to idols, they looked to other nations, they looked to Egypt, who had previously held them in captivity, and who had let them down in the past and would let them down in the future. And God goes on. Through a land of hardship and distress, of lions and lionesses, of adders and darting snakes, the envoys carry their riches on donkeys' backs and treasures on humps of camels, to that unprofitable nation, to Egypt, whose help is utterly useless. Therefore I call her Rahab the do-nothing. This is a picture of Israel sending delegations down to Egypt to plead for help. Go now, write it on a tablet for them, inscribe it on a scroll, that for the days to come it may be an everlasting witness. For these are a rebellious people, deceitful children unwilling to listen to the Lord's instruction. They say no to the seers. See no more visions, and to the prophets, give us no more visions of what is right. Tell us pleasant things, prophesy illusions. Leave this way, get off this path, and stop confronting us with the Holy One of Israel. Oh, what a sad picture it paints. And what God is doing here, he says, go now, write it on a tablet for them. God knew that this people at this time would not repent. But Isaiah is to write all this down, so that at some point in the future, they would look back and see, a future people would look back and see that God was actually right. And the people at the time didn't want to hear any more from the prophets. They didn't want to hear from God. They didn't want to see God. Therefore, this is what the Holy One of Israel says: because you have rejected this message, relied on oppression, and depended upon deceit, this sin will become for you like a high wall, cracked and bulging, that suddenly collapses in an instant. It will break in pieces like pottery, shattered so mercilessly that among its pieces not a fragment will be found for taking coals from a hearth or scooping water out of a stream. So we see the plans would not work. The sins would be like a cracking wall. Suddenly it would all collapse. And as our society relies more and more upon lies, more and more rejects anything to do with God, at some point it will all collapse. But there's good news. But for that, you'll have to wait for the next installment.